Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're all doing great. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing folks from all over the place tuning in. The crackle of thunder rolled across the fair wind sky as Logan Brooks gripped the wheel of his battered pickup, veering off the gravel-strewn service road. Overhead, the airport loudspeakers sputtered out warnings of an approaching storm. The heavy scent of wet earth and metal hung thick in the air. At the far end of the tarmac, the Gulfstream jet he'd been called in to repair sat like a wounded bird, surrounded by sleek figures in spotless suits, buzzing with idle curiosity and murmured commentary. Logan swung open his truck door, tightening his jaw against the prying eyes. Slung over his shoulder was a battered old toolbox, its chipped paint worn smooth by years of hard use. Inside the gleaming terminal, Eleanor Whitaker stood frozen at the vast pane of glass, a cup of black coffee cradled in her hand. She watched the battered pickup pull into view. The wind whipped away the morning haze, peeling it back to reveal the first sharp outlines of the day. Logan strode toward the jet. He could feel their gazes stabbing into him like tiny needles. Someone muttered under their breath, "Good luck, junkyard cowboy." Logan didn't flinch. He popped the engine panel open and immediately recognized the danger. The fuel lines were corroded, clamps rusted, with electrical wiring fraying dangerously close. One wrong spark, and the whole plane could go up. This wasn't a job for polished hands with expensive watches. Logan rolled up his sleeves and got to work, swift, precise, and utterly focused. Every movement of his fingers was a quiet rebellion against the noise. The click of polished shoes, the distant laughter, even the storm closing in. All of it faded away, swallowed by his concentration. Eleanor lowered her coffee cup, settling silently into a leather chair. She had stood atop the peak of success for 20 years, but rarely had she seen someone work with such quiet gravity and fierce devotion. She didn't just see a mechanic. She saw a soul fighting for what was right with everything he had. The storm grumbled overhead. The Gulfstream gave a slight shudder as the systems flickered back to life, soft lights winking along its body. The buzz of conversation died mid-sentence. Silence fell. Logan finished, wiped his hands against the cloth hanging from his belt, and turned to leave. And that was when Eleanor Whitaker pushed open the terminal door and stepped outside. The wind tore at her coat, but her gaze, steady and stripped of all pretense, fixed on Logan. In that moment, carried on the trembling tension between two beating hearts, something took root. Before the rest of the world could catch up with them, a spark had already been lit. Logan Brooks set his toolbox down beneath the wing of the jet, his hands steady against the gusting wind. Every step he took felt as though it drove deeper into the earth. He glanced across the nose of the plane, his chest heavy. The way the men in tailored suits looked at him, as if he were a stain on an immaculate white carpet, had long ago become familiar. Logan unlatched the engine cover, his fingers trailing across the tubes, clamps, and finally settling on the dangerous rupture. The cold, broken metal beneath his fingertips was a warning more real than any alarm bell. For a moment, he leaned back, drawing a breath into his lungs, before forcing himself back to focus. Dark clouds were pressing overhead, a reminder that if he didn't move quickly, this entire aircraft could become another casualty of the brewing storm. Inside the terminal's glass tower, Eleanor Whitaker stood still, her hand tight around a coffee cup gone cold. In all her years working with top executives and seasoned engineers, she had never seen anyone approach a task with such raw honesty and relentless determination. She could feel it, the rare, unsettling gravity of witnessing something real amidst the noise. Logan secured the fittings, his hands moving with quick, practiced precision. His mind raced, calculating risks, heat, pressure, leak points. Another crack of thunder split the sky. Logan gritted his teeth, narrowing his eyes at the turbine blades beginning to spin loosely in the storm's breath. He knew time was not on his side. For one brief heartbeat, Eleanor caught his gaze, the look of a man tracing the contours of a problem not with arrogance, but with a craftsman's reverence. No titles, no walls, just a human being doing the right thing, simply because it needed to be done. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart slow for just a moment. With a final adjustment, Logan tightened the last of the connections, then flicked the auxiliary starter switch. For a brief instant, the heavy groan of the engine shifted, smoothed into a low, steady hum. The suited spectators inside the terminal broke into scattered applause, but Eleanor remained still, unmoving, watching only him. Logan closed the panel, wiping his hands on his worn denim shirt. He turned back toward his battered pickup truck, his intent clear. He wasn't looking for thanks, wasn't expecting recognition. But across the runway, Eleanor Whitaker was already stepping into the open, her movements fluid, purposeful, striking against the darkening sky. The jet groaned to life in a deep, resonant rumble, like a heart stubbornly beating back to strength. Logan Brooks stepped back, watching the now stabilized engine with a steady gaze. No hint of pride, no hunger for applause. To him, every machine he saved was a sacred duty, not a platform for ego. Above, the airport flag flapped against the wind, as if silently bearing witness to something unseen but deeply felt. Inside the terminal, the once smirking executives had fallen silent. Their laughter had drained away, leaving only uneasy glances traded between polished shoes and tailored suits. Eleanor Whitaker, still behind the tall glass, didn't smile openly. She simply tilted her head ever so slightly, an almost invisible softening of her lips, like someone feeling a forgotten warmth flicker to life inside. Out on the tarmac, Logan was already packing up, the rhythm of his movements as methodical as ever. Whether it was a gleaming Gulfstream or an aging tractor in a forgotten field, his work always ended the same way, quietly, without ceremony. The thick scent of oil and metal filled the air, clinging to the storm-heavy breeze. Logan slung a rag over his shoulder, hefted the familiar weight of his toolbox, and began the slow walk back to his battered truck. The sharp click of heels on concrete broke the rhythm. Logan stopped. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Eleanor Whitaker was coming toward him, each step carrying the deliberate certainty of someone who had lived long enough to know when not to hesitate. "Mr. Brooks," Eleanor called, her voice as soft and natural as a morning greeting. Logan turned, his slate-gray eyes meeting her deep, stormy blue ones. "Would you like to double-check the work?" he asked, his tone all business, nothing more. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her heels clicking until she was close enough that Logan could see the outline of her leather pumps etched into the dusty tarmac. "You did something others wouldn't even dare attempt," Eleanor said, her voice low but clear. Logan shrugged, a small, instinctive movement. "I just did what needed doing." The faintest smile ghosted across her lips. She exhaled, a breath full of emotion she hadn't yet sorted out, and then, almost impulsively, asked, "Mr. Brooks, if someone were to propose something completely reckless right now, would you say yes?" The sunlight caught in Eleanor's hair, framing her not as the towering CEO or the invincible business magnate, but simply as a woman standing bare in the quiet enormity of her own heart. Logan hesitated just for a fraction of a second. The wind died down around them, leaving the world unnaturally still. "Depends," he said, his voice roughened by years of storms and stubbornness, his fingertips still stained with grease. "Depend on the kind of crazy you're talking about." And in that fleeting, charged moment, Eleanor Whitaker faced the truest mirror she had ever found. Not gilded with power, not shaped by expectation, but reflected back by a man who didn't care who she was on paper, only who she was standing there in front of him, real and unguarded. The heavy thud of Eleanor's heels echoed against the sun-baked concrete. The wind tossed strands of hair across her face, but Eleanor didn't falter. She moved forward without hesitation. Logan Brooks noticed her coming before he heard her. Her presence sliced clean through the lingering smells of grease, metal, and hard labor, pulling him sharply into the present. She stopped 3 feet away from him. "Mr. Brooks, Eleanor said, her voice warm, steady. Logan nodded, greeting her with a solid, wordless acknowledgement. He wasn't used to conversations without tools in hand, or being the center of attention like this. In that raw moment on the heat-shimmering tarmac, Eleanor looked at him with a clarity that stripped away everything superficial. "You're not like them," she said. "No judgment, no performance, just a simple, undeniable fact." Logan shrugged lightly, an ingrained reflex to any comment aimed his way. A breeze passed through, carrying with it the rich scents of hot engine oil and dry grass from the airfield's edges. Eleanor tightened her hands inside her jacket pockets. Part of her wanted to maintain distance. Another part, the braver, more desperate part, urged her to step closer past the point of no return. "I've met plenty of people who know how to talk," Eleanor continued, her gaze never wavering from his. "Rarely do I meet someone who simply does what's right without needing to say a word." Logan gave a small, lopsided smile, a smile more sad than amused. "Talking's easier than doing," he said. Silence hung between them. Only the faint whir of distant engines and the whisper of dry grass in the breeze filled the air. In that stillness, Eleanor saw it clearly. The man standing before her didn't need lessons in how to live honorably. He already lived it, without fanfare, without demand. "If I told you," Eleanor began slowly, her voice dipping into something vulnerable, "that I'm looking for someone, not for money, not for fame, but simply—" She hesitated, heart pounding. "For the things you can't count in dollars." Logan watched her quietly. There was no suspicion in his eyes, no calculation, only steady, grounded listening. "Then I'd ask," he said, "why you're asking me." Eleanor let out a soft, genuine laugh. It wasn't the clipped, strategic laughter she used in boardrooms. It was real. "Because," she said, "you're the only one today who didn't need to know who I was to do the right thing." Logan dipped his head slightly, wiping greasy hands on his faded jeans. "I just saw a machine that needed saving," he said, "and I knew how to fix it." Another moment of peace unfurled between them. An invisible thread stitched into the world, binding two lives at the frayed edges. "Mr. Brooks," Eleanor said again, slower this time, her voice almost hesitant. "What if I offered you a chance? Not just to fix engines, but to—" She paused. Logan lifted his head, the wind brushing a dark lock of hair across his forehead. "A chance to do something reckless. With me." Logan didn't rush to respond. He felt the weight of her words, not in the phrasing, but in the naked hope beneath them. "How reckless?" he asked, his voice as light as the breeze. "Reckless enough," Eleanor whispered, "to leave everything safe behind and chase something worth living for." The airfield fell utterly silent. No murmurs, no hurried footsteps, only two souls standing on scorched concrete under an infinite sky. Logan inhaled deeply. He looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred, built for toil, not for luxury or glory. Then he looked at her, really looked, and he saw not a business mogul or a queen of wealth, but a woman more isolated than any soul he'd ever known. "I don't know how to fly a jet," Logan said quietly. "I don't need a pilot," Eleanor replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I need a partner." A fresh gust stirred around them. Logan closed his eyes for a beat, letting the decision settle, not in his mind, but in his heart. "All right," he said, opening his eyes. No flourish, no grand speech, just a single word. Solid, certain, like a stone dropped into the still waters of a forgotten pond. Eleanor exhaled softly, a sound so slight it almost didn't exist. She took one small step closer, not to overpower him, but to share the gravity of the moment. "Then, Logan Brooks," she murmured, "let's go find a real life together." Above them, the sun finally broke free of the storm clouds, casting beams of light over the oil-streaked tarmac and rain-dappled concrete. And in that golden wash of light, amid all that had been broken and rebuilt that fateful morning, two people, a grease-stained mechanic and a woman born in a marble halls, stood side by side. They had no contracts, no guarantees, Only empty hands, and hearts full to bursting. It wasn't the start of a business deal. It was the beginning of an odyssey. The wind swept across Fairwind Airport, carrying the scent of metal, oil, and the indelible footprints of lives that refused to fade. Logan Brooks and Eleanor Whitaker stood at the edge of the runway, beneath a sky streaked with light and the brewing signs of an incoming storm. Eleanor drew in a deep breath. She wore no high heels, no jewelry, only a gaze steadier than any vow ever spoken. Logan still had the toolbox slung over his shoulder, grease smudging the tips of his fingers. He looked at the world through Eleanor's eyes, and for the first time in years, he saw a different road stretching before him. Not far away, behind the glass of the terminal, executives, staff, and even members of the press were beginning to gather. Cameras were raised, but Eleanor didn't so much as glance their way. She extended her hand toward Logan, a small, quiet gesture, an unspoken invitation. Logan hesitated for a beat. Then, without a word, he set the toolbox down onto the tarmac and reached out his hand. Eleanor placed hers into his. A hardened fingertip brushed against a calloused palm. Two people. No contracts, no promises, just a choice made in silence. Logan allowed himself a rare, fleeting smile, then turned toward the battered hangars in the distance. Every step they took together was a vow. They left behind rules, power games, and all the old illusions of prestige. Each time Eleanor's courage faltered, Logan tightened his grip on her hand, wordlessly, steadily. No grand declarations needed. Across the runway, the crowd buzzed like it was watching a stage play. Some laughed. Some whispered behind raised hands. Some lifted their phones to capture the scene. But Eleanor only saw Logan, and Logan only saw Eleanor. They reached Logan's battered, old pickup truck. Logan paused, turning to her. "From here," he said, his voice low but certain. "No one else decides for us." Eleanor nodded. She curled her fingers into the worn cuff of his flannel sleeve, a silent anchor. He opened the truck door. Without hesitation, Eleanor climbed into the passenger seat. The engine rumbled to life, coughing once before settling into a steady growl. Logan pulled away from the runway, leaving behind Fairwind Airport with its crumbling statues and broken rules. Down the empty road, Eleanor gazed out the window. She saw the vast sky stretching open, the rolling hills blurred in soft shades of gray, and a future no one had yet dared to name. "Mr. Brooks," she murmured, her voice nearly lost to the hum of the tires. "If we never come back, would you regret it?" Logan smiled. "Yeah," he said, "I would." He glanced over at her, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "But not because of what we're leaving behind, because of what we still haven't reached yet." And so, in that battered old truck still scented with oil and hard days, Logan and Eleanor drove toward an unwritten future. No labels, no titles, no gilded promises, just two souls, just trust. The tires of the old pickup bumped along the uneven dirt road, rattling over loose gravel and drifting sand. Logan Brooks drove with bare hands, the buttons of his work shirt undone, revealing the scars and grease embedded deep into his skin. In the passenger seat, Eleanor Whitaker sat quietly. She had kicked off her shoes, her bare feet resting lightly on the worn, scratchy floor mat of the truck. Every movement Logan made, shifting gears, easing off the accelerator, carried a sincerity she had rarely seen in the polished world she'd left behind. They passed fields of wild grass and rows of weather-beaten trees. In the distance, tucked away near a bend in the road, tin-roofed houses glowed under the muted slant of the late afternoon sun. Logan pointed ahead. "That's where I go when the world gets too loud," he said. Eleanor tilted her head, following his gesture. Nestled among the weeds and tangled grass stood an old steel hangar, rusted and modest. Logan pulled the truck closer, braking with a soft squeal of sand under the tires. He climbed out first, then circled around to open Eleanor's door. "Not much to look at," he said, his voice tinged with a sheepish sort of pride. Eleanor laughed, genuine and light. "That's exactly why I chose to follow you," she replied. Together, They stepped into the hangar. The heavy door groaned open, singing a tired hymn to the passing years. Inside, there were no gleaming jets or polished trophies. Just skeletal frames of old planes, a few rusted-out trucks, and a battered wooden workbench scarred by time and toil. The walls were pinned with black and white photographs, snapshots of Logan and an older man, both holding oil-stained flags, laughing beside engines that had seen better days. Eleanor wandered slowly among the scattered machinery, letting her fingers drift across battered metal and cracked leather seats until she reached the workbench. She placed her hand flat against it, as if trying to absorb the lingering warmth of all the days lived and lost here. Behind her, Logan spoke softly. "This is where my father still lives," he said. Outside, sunlight broke through the ragged clouds, casting a soft gold over the sky like a benediction. Eleanor turned to face him, masking the emotions stirring behind her eyes. "And now?" she asked simply. Logan tilted his head, considering. Then he crouched down, rummaging through a drawer beneath the bench, and pulled out a small weather box. Inside was no ring, no trophy, no promise of wealth. Just an old, worn key, its tag frayed and faded red. He placed it into Eleanor's palm. "This key," Logan said, "opens any door that's still left open in your life." Eleanor curled her fingers around it, the rough edges pressing into her skin. In that small, fleeting moment, she didn't feel like she was running away anymore. She felt like she was finally stepping toward something real. And so, in that dusty hangar filled with broken dreams and stubborn memories, Logan Brooks and Eleanor Whitaker began their journey together. Not on the polished wings of luxury, but on solid ground, on rough roads, through wild hopes and the scent of honest grease. Inside the dusty hangar, the soft morning light filtered through the rusted metal sheets, casting faded gold across the concrete floor. Logan Brooks pulled on a pair of worn leather gloves, busy working on the old airplane, while Eleanor Whitaker hovered hesitantly near the workbench. Gone was the shimmering designer suit. Gone were the high heels. Eleanor now wore a faded t-shirt and cut-off jeans, her hair tied up in a messy ponytail. Her once delicate, manicured hands trembled slightly as she grasped an oil filter wrench. "Just turn it counterclockwise," Logan instructed patiently, with the kind of steady tone that came from years of working with stubborn metal rather than fragile egos. Eleanor crouched down, bracing herself awkwardly, biting her lip as she struggled to loosen the filter. Despite her efforts, thick black grease smeared across her palms, staining her fingers. The scraping sound of the wrench finally giving way made Eleanor burst into laughter, a small, real, unguarded laugh. "I always thought only men got filthy doing this kind of work," she said, holding up her oil-smeared hand in mock dismay. Logan looked up, a rare, fleeting smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Grease," he said, "is a lot like life. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to fix what's broken." All that morning, Eleanor did things she had never imagined. She wiped down greasy engine parts. She tightened bolts under the cowling. She learned to tell the difference between a 9/16 and a half-inch wrench. Tasks she once would have dismissed as beneath her. The old Eleanor Whitaker who used to dazzle boardrooms with gold bracelets and designer watches. But here, in the dust, in the oil-stained floorboards and the stubborn bolts, Eleanor laughed more in a single morning than she had in months of sterile meetings. Logan pulled over an old metal chair and motioned for her to sit down. "Congratulations," he said, his voice warm with teasing. "You're officially the messiest airplane mechanic of the decade." Eleanor snorted a laugh, utterly unbothered despite her exhaustion. Her hands were still covered in oil. Her hair was streaked with dust. But inside her chest, something she hadn't felt in years was beginning to grow. Freedom. She realized then. Real life didn't have to shine to truly sparkle. And as the sun climbed higher, Logan and Eleanor rolled the small plane out into the open together. Two people, two pairs of grease-streaked hands, pushing a dream across solid ground. No titles, no riches, just two souls learning how to live again from the ground up. At dawn, As the first sliver of sunlight crept over the horizon, Eleanor sat on the worn step outside the hangar, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The air was thick with the mingled scents of fresh coffee, morning dew, and the faint, metallic tang of the weathered hangar doors. Logan sat beside her, sleeves rolled up, a battered cap pulled low over his brow. Between them, an old radio crackled out broken fragments of news. Whitaker Holdings stock continues to plunge. Former CEO Eleanor Whitaker remains absent from the media spotlight. Rumors swirl about a runaway heiress and an unknown mechanic. Eleanor took a slow sip of her coffee, her expression unchanged. "Want me to turn it off?" Logan asked, his voice casual, offering without pushing. Eleanor shook her head. "Running never made a storm stop blowing," she said, her voice steadier now than it had been during the days when she signed a dozen contracts before noon. Somewhere down the road, a pickup truck with a blown tire rumbled past, the smell of scorched rubber drifting over like a messenger from the world they'd left behind. Logan counted items on his fingers with a lopsided grin. 2 loaves of bread, green tea, and 3 cartons of milk, he said, nodding toward the storeroom. Eleanor smiled, an honest, quiet smile, not the polished smirk she once wore at boardroom tables. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her jacket. She hesitated. It had been nearly 2 days since she'd touched it. Eleanor pulled it out. 127 missed calls. Dozens of messages stacked one over another. One message blinked. "Come back immediately." Another, "You're destroying everything." And another, "They're laughing at us." Logan watched her quietly. "You don't have to answer," he said, his voice a solid presence beside her. Eleanor stared at the flashing screen for a long moment before pressing and holding the power button. The screen went dark. Silence. "I'm not hungry for their answers anymore," she said softly. "I'm hungry for days that actually belong to me." Logan simply nodded, understanding without needing to speak. That afternoon, they hauled supply crates outside. The thin crescent of a midday moon hung overhead, and the soft, worn light wrapped the world in something tender and real. "I can't promise smooth roads or clear skies," Logan said, handing Eleanor a battered toolbox. "But I can promise to walk beside you, if you choose yourself." Eleanor looked at him, then out over the vast, open fields. "I choose," she said. And under the generous stretch of sunlit sky, surrounded by broken fences, rusted wings, and endless space, Eleanor Whitaker, for the first time in her life, truly belonged to herself. One heavy afternoon, while Eleanor and Logan were still busy reorganizing the hangar, the crunch of tires on gravel echoed from the end of the road. Logan looked up, the wrench slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. A convoy of sleek black SUVs rolled up to the clearing. The doors swung open in unison, and from within emerged a stream of dark suits like a creeping tide. Leading them was Victor Sterling, the former chief advisor to Whitaker Holdings. A man of silver hair, a tailored gray suit, and the kind of bearing that seemed to carry centuries of obligation on his shoulders. Eleanor set her broom aside. She didn't flinch, nor did she move forward to greet them. Logan stood beside her, still and silent, as solid as stone. Victor approached, no bodyguards needed. His very presence carved a gash through the heavy afternoon air. "Eleanor," Victor said, his voice low and steady. "It's time you came home." That voice dragged with it hundreds of board meetings, thousands of decisions Eleanor had once signed off on behind cold glass walls. She exhaled slowly, feeling the ghost of old exhaustion creeping up with each of Victor's measured steps. "I'm not going anywhere," Eleanor answered, her voice soft as thread, but unwavering. Victor lifted an eyebrow, a small movement, but loaded with authority. "Stocks are down 27%. The press is circling. Investors are demanding answers." He paused, then added, "Your family name is being buried." Eleanor closed her eyes for a heartbeat, not to retreat, but to listen to the part of her that had been whispering all along. When she opened them, her gaze was clear. A name doesn't save a soul. A heavy silence fell between them. Victor adjusted his silver watch, a gesture polished by decades of negotiations. Your father built that legacy, Victor said, voice sharper now. You're throwing it all away. For a moment, the weight of that name nearly buckled her knees. The image of her father, his old leather pilot's cap, his muddy boots, and his stubborn, brilliant dreams flashing behind her eyes. You're wrong, Eleanor said quietly. My father built a place for us to fly, not to be chained to spreadsheets. Victor's jaw tightened. You have one last chance. Today, Eleanor. Get in the car, come back, and prove you're still a Whitaker. Logan stayed silent, just tightening his grip around the battered truck's steering wheel. Eleanor turned to Logan. In his gaze, there was no pressure, no demand, only a silent question. Do you want to leave or stay? She placed her hand over his oil-stained one. A small gesture, a giant answer. Eleanor faced Victor again. I've made my choice. Victor held her gaze for a long moment, emotions he couldn't name flickering across his lined face. Finally, he gave a small nod, not of agreement, but of final understanding. Without another word, he turned back toward the SUVs, the silent security team trailing him like shadows. The car door slammed. Engines roared to life. One by one, the vehicles peeled away, leaving the dusty clearing, the golden light, and two people standing firmly in it. Eleanor leaned into Logan's shoulder. I never wanted to be a queen locked away in a tower, she whispered. I just wanted to be someone real. Logan nodded, squeezing her hand gently. Outside, the wind still blew. But inside, for the first time, Eleanor felt her truth take root, steady, unshakable, deep into the earth. The wide afternoon stretched out, the wind pushing against the old hangar doors, making them rattle and creak. Inside the hangar, Eleanor Whitaker moved quietly, sorting through scattered piles of tools. Outside, Logan Brooks drove back from town, his truck loaded with supplies. As Eleanor shifted a box of nails to one side, the phone she had abandoned in the corner buzzed. One single message flashed on the cracked screen. Victor Sterling, board meeting in 2 hours. Decision on the future. Eleanor gathered the nails, wiped her oil-stained hands on her jeans, and stepped out onto the front porch, gazing up at the sky painted in soft shades of pink and gold. In the distance, Logan pulled up, the setting sun glinting off the truck's dusty hood. Bundles of equipment were stacked in the passenger seat. He climbed down, his boots kicking up little puffs of dry earth. There, in the stillness laced with the scent of mud and salt in the wind, Eleanor realized something. No meeting, no vote, no title was more important than the life unfolding right here before her eyes. Everything all right? Logan asked, voice calm and steady. Eleanor held up her phone, a faint, almost amused smile playing on her lips. Victor wants me to attend a board meeting. Logan simply raised an eyebrow. And Eleanor chuckled softly, not out of defiance, not out of fear, but with a certainty that felt stitched in her bones. I'm staying, she said. If they want to decide the future, they'll have to do it without me. Logan nodded, no surprise in his expression, just quiet pride. No one gets to decide who you are, he said like. It was the simplest truth in the world. Eleanor turned back toward the hangar. Inside, the unfinished work waited, nails, boards, memories pressed into old walls. She picked up a battered wooden ladder, once used to fix the wings of an aging airplane. With a thick black marker, she scrawled a single word across one wall. Belong. The afternoon stretched on, golden and timeless. Eleanor and Logan sat side by side on the porch, the horizon burning with the last breath of the day. Logan handed her a dented mason jar. What's this? Eleanor asked, taking it. Lemonade, Logan said, eyes twinkling. Maybe a little too much sugar. You'll need it for the sweetness ahead. They clinked jars with a soft clink. No grand speeches, no stage lights or applause. Just a choice, quiet, stubborn, real. Just Eleanor, just Logan, and a brand new beginning. That afternoon, as the slanting sunset cast patches of gold across the hangar roof, Eleanor sat alone on the front steps. Beside her rested an old, battered cardboard box, stuffed full of papers, contract copies, corporate bylaws, investment charts. What once were her badges of honor, now felt like the broken chains of a life she no longer belonged to. Logan emerged from the hangar, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He set one down next to her. He didn't ask. He didn't press. He simply sat beside her, silent. Eleanor reached into the box and pulled out the first sheet. Her name printed in bold, emblazoned across a major Whitaker Holdings acquisition agreement. She tore it into small, deliberate pieces. The wind picked up, scattering the fragments like dandelion seeds into the fading light. The next page, a framed certificate. Top 30 under 30 in business excellence. Eleanor paused, her fingers brushing the embossed gold seal. Then, slowly, she ripped it clean through. Steady, certain, as if slicing through invisible chains, one by one. Logan handed her a small bundle of kindling. "Want to burn them?" he asked, voice low and warm. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Yeah," she whispered, but not out of anger. Just as a ceremony. They built a small fire, standing shoulder to shoulder, as the breeze tugged at their clothes and the first stars blinked into view. The fire crackled, golden orange against the deepening purple of the sky. Piece by piece, the papers disappeared into the flames. Contracts, awards, titles, ashes now. Eleanor watched the fire, and for a fleeting moment, she saw herself. A little girl holding a kite, running barefoot across the front yard beneath an old mulberry tree. A door closed behind her. The door of expectations, of suffocating duty. No noise, no mourning. Just Eleanor Whitaker, finally stepping into her own freedom. When the fire died down, Eleanor leaned into Logan's side, resting her head against his shoulder. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "let's start fixing up the old runway." Logan chuckled. And after that, the roof. Above them, the stars multiplied, scattering across the sky like seeds of light. One small fire burned out, but a whole new sky had begun to blaze. The next morning, while the sunlight was still pale gold across the ground, Eleanor and Logan stood outside the old hangar. No more pressure, no more fear, just 2 people slowly relearning how to live. Logan pushed open the rusted steel doors. The wind rushed through the tin roof, carrying the scent of oil and earth. Out in the lot, a small group had gathered. Local reporters, a few curious neighbors, strangers from town. "Is that really Eleanor Whitaker?" someone called out. Eleanor stood with her hands loosely clasped behind her back, wearing worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. "Who else would it be?" she replied, her voice soft, not sarcastic, not defensive. Simply true. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. "Why choose to stay here? Why walk away from everything you had? Don't you fear regret?" Logan moved closer, standing solidly at her side, an anchor, silent but steady. Eleanor caught the gaze of a little girl in the crowd, clutching an old boxy camera, her wide eyes full of wonder. Eleanor knelt down gently. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lila," the girl whispered. "What do you like to do, Lila?" "I like taking pictures of things people forgot," Lila said, her voice shy but bright. Eleanor smiled, really smiled, and stood. She swung the hangar doors open wide, revealing the dusty, old workshop, rusted planes, battered tool chests, cracked leather seats. "This," Eleanor said, her voice carrying on the breeze, "is a place for forgotten dreams. A place for anyone who wants to start over. For anyone who wants to rebuild. For anyone ready to bring something back to life." The wind stirred. For a moment, the crowd stood silent, soaking it in. Then someone stepped forward. Then another. And another. Logan stayed quietly at Eleanor's side, his gaze warm and patient. It wasn't a press conference anymore. It wasn't about headlines or gossip. It was about people. People searching for a new beginning. And Eleanor, for the first time in her life, stepped into the sunlight. Not to answer for herself, not to justify anything, but simply to open the door. Early in the morning, when spring still smelled thick of damp earth, Eleanor and Logan pulled back the dusty tarps covering the old Piper Cub. The aircraft's body was scratched and scarred, its wings mottled with grease stains, but Logan placed his hand on it with a kind of reverence. "There's still a soul in here," he said, "just waiting to be woken up." For 3 straight days, they worked side by side. Logan under the fuselage, Eleanor handing him tools. There were clumsy moments full of laughter, like when Eleanor ended up smeared in oil, or when Logan stepped on a box of nails and let out a colorful string of curses. Small triumphs bloomed naturally between them. The first time Eleanor managed to use the wrench properly, the little burn she got on her forehead reaching for a stubborn bolt, the way Logan patiently showed her each step, as if teaching someone not just about machines, but about starting over. On the fourth afternoon, Eleanor rested her hand atop the polished cowling. "Ready?" Logan asked. Eleanor nodded, her eyes shining, not because of achievements or titles, but because of something simpler: hope. The Piper Cub rumbled and shuddered along the runway. Its wheels thudded against the earth. Then, gently, as if remembering how, lifted free. Inside the cramped cockpit, Eleanor placed her hand on the yoke. Logan looked at her and smiled. "First time flying?" he asked. "And first time truly rising," she answered softly. The propeller cut clean through the wind. The wings stiffened. The Piper lifted higher, small and fragile as a newly dreamed wish. From above, Eleanor looked down and saw the tiny sandy hills, the winding roads twisting like threads across the landscape. Far below, she caught sight of the old airfield, the place she had once walked away from. Logan's voice crackled through the headset. "Which way do you want to head?" Eleanor tapped her finger toward the west, where the sun was dipping low behind the hills. "Toward where we can still catch the sunrise," she said. "Not running away, not chasing anything, just flying high enough to look back and know the choice she made was the right one." In the cockpit, Eleanor leaned her head gently against Logan's shoulder. "It doesn't matter where we land," she whispered, "as long as we're flying true." Logan squeezed her hand lightly. Outside the window, the sky stretched wide and endless before them. The Piper Cub floated on the back of the wind, light as a ribbon of gold. Inside the cockpit, Eleanor and Logan sat close, Eleanor's hand still resting on the yoke, feeling the subtle dips of the hills, the curves of rivers, and the wide-open land stretching out to welcome them. "We're almost there," Logan said through the headset, his voice warm and steady. "Where to?" Eleanor asked, though her heart already knew. "A blank spot on the map," Logan answered. "A clean slate for us to draw our own lines." The propeller slowed. The wheels brushed down against a meadow speckled with wild daisies and clover. The Piper trembled softly as it touched earth, then came to a stop, leaving only the sound of the wind and the footsteps of two souls stepping out into a world no one had named yet. No neon lights, no velvet ropes, only the ground, the breeze, and two hearts just beginning to write their own story. Eleanor leaned her head lightly against Logan's shoulder. "What do you think?" she asked, her voice small, full of wonder. "I think we should build," Logan said, his gaze sweeping the open field where wildflowers bowed in the breeze. "This will be home." They walked forward, stepping through thick tufts of grass, Eleanor giggling softly as mud clung to her boots. Neither of them complained. There was a quiet joy in it, the knowing that every great thing begins with small, messy beginnings. Beneath a tall old oak, Logan reached into his battered duffel and pulled something out. He held it out to Eleanor. An old, worn compass, its casing scratched but lovingly polished. "I figured we'd need some guidance," he said with a grin. Eleanor took the compass, lifting it up. The needle spun, wavered, then slowly settled, as if humming a soft tune. "What direction do you choose?" she teased, smiling wide. "Any direction you want," Eleanor, Logan said, meaning every word. She gazed out, at the endless open fields, at the skies so vast it made her chest ache. And Eleanor understood. This wasn't a flight away from something. It was a flight back to herself. Early in the morning, with the scent of damp earth and the chatter of birds, Eleanor and Logan greeted a new day inside the small workshop they had rebuilt with their own hands. The wooden sign above the entrance was still unfinished, the words scrawled in uneven letters. Dreams in flight. They started with the forgotten airplanes, broken, rusted, many of them nothing more than lumps of metal soaked in oil. Logan pulled on his work gloves. Eleanor sorted through the tools. Together, they welded cracks back together, patched broken wings, and sanded down battered fuselages until the bare metal gleamed faintly under the rising sun. A small triumph came when the old, battered Stinson engine roared back to life for the first time. Its rumble echoed through the workshop's crooked rafters, drawing a crowd of curious neighbors and wide-eyed children who clapped and cheered without hesitation. "What do you think?" Eleanor asked, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Her face lit up with something far richer than pride. "I think this is just the beginning," Logan said, smiling in that quiet way of his. That afternoon, Eleanor knelt in the dirt with the village kids, teaching them how to piece together tiny propeller toys from scraps. There was laughter. There were little hands grabbing at hers. There were bright eyes looking up at dreams that had nothing to do with legacies or profit margins. Just hope, as fragile and free as paper kites. Another small climax came as the little Stinson was wheeled out under the open sky, ready for its first test flight. Eleanor, her jacket worn thin at the elbows and her hands still smudged with oil, reached out and took Logan's hand. "Are you scared?" Logan asked softly. "I used to be scared of losing everything," Eleanor whispered back. "But now, I'm only afraid of missing out on my own dreams." Logan's smile deepened. The Stinson rumbled and took off toward the horizon, its engine's heartbeat fading into the golden fields beyond. On the ground, Eleanor and Logan stood side by side, their hands clasped, their hearts beating in rhythm with the plane soaring higher and higher. A small moment passed between them. Eleanor looked up at Logan and whispered, "I once had the whole world." She paused, voice trembling not with fear, but with truth. "But I never felt more human than I do right now." Logan didn't answer with words. He just squeezed her hand, anchoring her to the earth they were finally calling home. Out beyond them, the sun spilled molten gold across the roof of the new hangar. A journey was beginning, not for power, not for anyone else's approval, but simply because they had finally dared to live honestly. Living authentically, a value that never grows old. In today's world, where success is often measured by wealth, fame, or social standing, the story of Eleanor Whitaker and Logan Brooks reminds us, true value isn't found in what others assign to us, but in how we choose to live each day. Eleanor once had it all: power, money, the spotlight. But deep down, she lacked the most essential thing: the freedom to live as her true self. Much like so many of us in the modern world, she had been swept into an invisible race, chasing family expectations, societal standards, or outdated definitions of success. We spend years climbing ladders, only to realize once we reach the top that it wasn't the mountain we ever wanted to conquer. Logan had no great wealth, no gleaming degrees, but he possessed something far rarer: sincerity and the courage to do what was right, even when it meant facing ridicule or contempt. He didn't repair planes for recognition. He did it because it needed to be done, and he never asked anyone for permission to do what was right. In a time when social media parades perfect lives that often leave us feeling inadequate, the lesson from Eleanor and Logan is more important than ever. We don't have to race to become the best version of ourselves according to someone else's standards. We only need the courage to live fully and honestly as who we already are. Happiness doesn't come from someone applauding your accomplishments. It comes from sitting beside someone you trust, sharing a simple cup of coffee, gazing out at the wide-open sky, and knowing deep in your bones, I am living my life, not asking anyone's permission. Wherever you are on your journey, whether you're a worker, a teacher, a retiree, or an entrepreneur, this lesson remains timeless. Because when the spotlight dims, what's left isn't the awards or the accolades. It's the hands that held you when you needed them most, and the small moments when you dared to live true to your own heart. Eleanor chose a life without titles, and perhaps today, so can we, choosing, even for just one day, to live genuinely for ourselves. Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from the heartland of America, a quiet countryside, or maybe a bustling city dreaming of open fields? Drop a comment. Below, I read every single one. And if this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of warmth in your day, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another uplifting story like this. Thank you so much for being here. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to bring you more heartfelt stories soon. Until next time, stay kind, stay inspired, and I'll see you in the next one.